President Trump and President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela are both sending their militaries into what seems like a confrontation. But is this really war between Venezuela and the United States, or is this just a couple of blowhards posturing? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Be sure to hit the subscribe button as always, guys. So check it out. This has been a story in a bunch of different outlets, which is honestly kind of hard to get like a decent coverage of it. But Al Jazeera seems to do the okayest job, probably because they're not really a party to either one of them. Venezuela is mobilizing some of its troops to the Colombian border as 2 U.S. warships move towards Venezuelan waters. Now, there's already an amphibious squadron that's off the coast of Venezuela doing what they say is an anti-drug operation. And Venezuela, in turn, is announcing the deployment of 15,000 troops to its border with Colombia. Now, here's what's, I think, so funny about this, is that a lot of outlets are like spinning their wheels, being like, this is a confrontation between these two. But in fact, it's kind of the opposite. Look, the U.S. says, listen, we are just sending these warships here as part of an anti-drug operation, which, as you guys know, both Navy ships and Coast Guard cutters will conduct anti-drug operations in the Caribbean, trying to interdict drug smuggling operations that go bring, illicit drugs into the United States. They're able to do so, right? The Navy is able to do that. But remember, I think most drug smuggling that takes place over the border with Mexico, over the land border. But then Venezuelan dictator Maduro has ordered 15,000 of his own troops to Colombia in also an anti-drug operation, right? He said, we fight the drug cartels on all fronts, saying that he seized 53 tons of drugs so far this year, right? And his Minister of Interior, effectively, said that his internal security on the border with Colombia is going to combat criminal groups involving aircraft, drones, and riverine security. Now, the real story, though, is this weird confrontation between these two individuals, right? Because remember that Maduro has a $50 million price on his head by the U.S. government, which is huge. It's as high as the bounty for bin Laden. Now, that doesn't mean that anybody's going to turn in Maduro. This is largely performative, just like nobody really was going, none of bin Laden's associates turned him in. But the Trump administration calls him one of the largest narco traffickers in the world and a threat to our national security, which is, I mean, maybe true. It's tough to say. Again, we're going to talk about sort of the evidence for and against this. But what I think is most important, right? You can see also the Department of Justice seizing nearly $1 billion in assets linked to Maduro, 2 private jets, 9 vehicles, and tons of cocaine that were traced directly, they claim, to the Venezuelan president. Of course, the Venezuelan foreign minister said that this was a ridiculous smokescreen and obviously an effort to distract from the Jeffrey Epstein controversy. And I think this is actually pretty hilarious because this is a little bit turning into a sort of dictator's knife fight, or an authoritarian's knife fight, rather. And what I mean by that is these guys are trying to hit each other in their politically weakest areas. And in the process, they're sort of outing their worst tendencies. And here's what I mean by this. So the fact is that it's almost certainly true that Maduro and his inner circle control a ton of wealth. Remember, Venezuela is a country in immense economic turmoil and has been for literally nearly a decade now. In fact, something like a third of Venezuelans have fled the country and are living in places like Brazil and Mexico and the United States. And Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, oversaw this and are ostensibly doing so to bring a sort of socialist utopia to Venezuela. And the funny thing is that Venezuela, by all accounts, should have been able to create like a Norway of Latin America, because they have unbelievable amounts of oil wealth. But the level of corruption within the Venezuelan government was so great that despite literally all they had to do is pump the oil out and sell it, right? And there's all sorts of schemes to do that, right? You could be like Saudi Aramco, where they say this is a company owned by the Saudi government. You could be like Brazil that says, listen, Petrobras is a Brazilian state-owned corporation who partners with and gets licensing fees from commercial oil operations. There's all sorts of ways to do it, but the Venezuelans didn't take any of the proven ways. They instead tried to fully soup to nuts nationalize it, and the level of corruption was so great that they actually managed to take literally free money from the ground and screw it up and managed to run it unprofitably. And then the state got so levered up by because what they would do is they wouldn't just sell the oil, then take the proceeds and fund social programs. No, to fund their socialist utopia, they took loans against it. It's sort of like saying, listen, I'm going to try to subsidize my kid's lifestyle by getting a job and working. You go, wow, that's cool and noble. The Venezuelan government said, I'm going to subsidize everyone's lifestyle by taking out credit cards and loans because people will give me credit because I have this big oil reserve. So the Venezuelan government's been an absolute train wreck. So it's really, really, I mean, it's hard to overstate how embarrassing it is for Maduro to get busted by the U.S. with nearly $1 billion of swag, particularly because it's parked in the United States, which is absolutely preposterous, right? Having 2 private jets, 9 vehicles, and nearly $700 million in total assets in the United States. Remember, a country that Maduro says is their greatest rival, that he exists to stick it to, essentially. And the funny thing is that Venezuela's foreign minister is like, no, this whole thing that Trump is doing is just a distraction from his most controversial area, which is his ties to notorious sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, right? There's tons of evidence that Jeffrey Epstein and Trump were absolutely the best of buds, and that, again, Trump acknowledged loving young women in the same way Epstein did, and Trump has refused to release the evidence that was going to be presented in court against sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, and never has formally identified any of his clients in any kind of official capacity. No one's ever been charged, despite Epstein's associate being convicted of literally trafficking. But trafficking to who? Oh, just nobody. And as we pointed out on this channel numerous times, of course, that unless you live under a rock, there is plenty of evidence for the lay person to believe that probably Donald Trump is a client and participant in Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation, namely because there are affidavits filed in court by victims in civil suits who have said, yes, the now president did assault me as part of Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation. So both of these guys are actually just slicing each other up in public, saying, listen, Maduro's people saying, yeah, Trump, you're just trying to send these warships to my coast to distract from the Epstein list. And Trump says, no, Venezuela, you're just mobilizing your National Guard, mobilizing your militia to distract people from the fact that you are also being exposed as the head of a drug cartel, that your national security apparatus is running a drug trafficking operation and looting money from the Venezuelan people. So this kind of the 2 worst people you knew are just absolutely trolling each other. And you can see that Venezuela is pulling out all the stops with its sort of, they call it like a Bolivarian militia, but the best way to kind of think about this is to say that it's housewives and retirees lining up to join some sort of militia. Now, obviously, you think housewives and retirees are looking to join a popular militia or whatever. They're Bolivarian, like People's Corps or what have you. No, this is part of some kind of coercive scheme by Maduro to get all these people to show up, right? There might be a chance at making a couple extra bucks if the Bolivarian militia gets like organized. But the idea is that Maduro wants to performatively show strength by mobilizing the entirety of the Venezuelan people, right, including 66-year-old auditors and 51-year-old housewives. But and then Trump, in turn, of course, is doing his own sort of preposterous scheme, sending warships and destroyers to the Venezuelan coast, like as though there's this big, robust naval smuggling effort, which is almost certainly untrue. And even Trump's own theory of Maduro and Venezuela as this drug trafficking empire doesn't really make a lot of sense because, well, I'll show you. One of the things that Trump is alleged, or the Trump administration has alleged, is that Maduro is the head of what they call Cartel de los Soles. And this is not a very well-known trafficking group, but it's been around since the 90s, and it's believed to be heavily linked to the Maduro government, right? And a lot of this seems to follow kind of a Russian sort of structure where the high-ranking officials within the Venezuelan government, it is taken as a given that their meager government salaries can be supplemented by, taken bribes. And these range from Venezuelan National Guardsmen trying to get stationed on the border so they can be paid in bribes for an illicit trade. But they say a large portion of those bribes are paid to their superiors and likely in turn paid to superiors all the way up, sort of like a reverse Ponzi scheme. Of course, at the highest levels, some of these officials likely are receiving cuts of the actual goods that pass through Venezuelan checkpoints. And so it seems like this is, again, a vast criminal conspiracy that Maduro is really a part of, and that's pretty uncomfortable for his administration. And again, this has been something that's been going on since the 90s. Reportedly, this Cartel de los Soles is named because Venezuelan generals wear suns, not stars. But here's the thing. It seems unlikely that they are doing a lot of naval trafficking because Venezuela, right, part of their allies in this operation is the FARC, according to the DEA, as well as the ELN, right, Tren de Aragua, a sort of Venezuelan street gang, and the Sinaloa cartel. And so the what I think is one of the takeaways here is this concept that there's, and this is how drug trafficking generally works, is that you have a low level, you have every step of the process over land, someone's taking a cut, right? Which is true of anything, right? By the time you sip a Pepsi, right, you got to think that the can was made by a third-party manufacturer. The ingredients were mixed together by Pepsi themselves. Then it was shipped to a bottling plant where the liquid and the can were put together and the can was labeled. Then it was packaged at the plant, right? And a third-party manufacturer manufactured the package. Then it's shipped to the distributor. The distributor, of course, the freight company takes a cut, the distributor takes a cut, and then it's sent to a gas station where the gas station, of course, marks up the price from wholesale, and then finally, puts it in the fridge and you purchase it. So it's no different in drug cartels, right? Just like there are easily probably 5 companies that make money by the time you crack open that Pepsi, not just PepsiCo itself. It's the same way in drug trafficking, right? So you're going to have this cartel. I'm sure Venezuelan, there's some for lack of a better term, in-house production in Venezuela, in the jungles, right? It's a poor country. Labor is extremely cheap. People are desperate, and that's a great combination for someone who's going to work in the drug trade. You corrupt these officials, which also is very easy to do when your officials are broke and starving, right? A $3 bribe, for example, to a Venezuelan border guard will get them to look the other way, whereas a U.S. Border Patrol agent, $3 is going to get you arrested because, well, that's not really any kind of meaningful sum of money. And so it's natural that economically that the cartels are going to have some level of grow or refinement operations in Venezuela or countries like Venezuela, but then it's going to get moved through these networks each time there's going to be the smuggling networks are going to take a cut, right? So FARC is going to get a cut from moving them through Colombia. The Sinaloa cartel is going to get a cut from moving them through Sinaloa. And sometimes it is done literally. It's like the Sinaloan cartel says, I buy your product and I move it through Mexico and then I sell it off to a street gang. Sometimes it's seen as like hey, we just want to cut and we won't mess with it, but it's got to flow through here. Now, you may say, Paul, well, why is Venezuela ranting and raving about having seized a bunch of drugs? Well, the answer, of course, is that every good drug organization, just like Pepsi tries desperately to take market share away from Coca-Cola, drug cartels always want to try to take share away from their rivals. And while Pepsi and Coke do it through an advertising war, sponsoring rival sports teams and stuff, when you are already illegal, like a drug cartel, well, you just get to kill your way to it, or you get to steal it. And so if you control the Venezuelan government, you can use the law to go after your rivals. So I'm sure the Venezuelan government does work tirelessly to arrest drug traffickers, but just rival drug traffickers. And that, I think, is the real takeaway here, though, is that both of these actions are performances, right? And in a way, they almost serve each other's interests by doing this. Because indeed, this confrontation with Venezuela is actually distracting Americans from the Jeffrey Epstein situation. And this confrontation with the Americans is, in fact, distracting Venezuelans from their problems at home. If it wasn't for the big bad villain of the United States, Venezuelans would probably have to sit there and look around and be like, damn, our country is poor as shit. And the U.S. doesn't even care about us, right? We're not like oppressed by the U.S. We're just ignored by the U.S. Our problem is our own government. And that is one of the fundamental problems, flaws, situations. You have to understand that there's a lot of manufactured issues that are just performative. And I think this is one of those examples, right? Because again, the U.S. moving 5,000 Marines, on ships into international waters, kind of near Venezuela. 5,000 Marines isn't enough to secure a handful of city blocks, let alone an entire country. So there's no chance that this is part of a larger sort of confrontation with Venezuela. Just like an army of retirees and 65-year-old auditors is not going to go stand toe-to-toe against, the largest military on earth in the United States. These guys are just performing. They're distracting. And, the fact that I'm out here covering it means that I'm in some ways doing their bidding. If you guys want to support the channel and get access to exclusive uncensored combat footage and YouTube videos that I would never be able to show on this platform, you want to become a member of combatvetnews.com. Just yesterday, we took a look at the propaganda combat footage released by North Korea showing the details of their operations inside Kursk. Plus, a huge thank you to our Colonel tier members over there, like James J, 21 Yanko, George F, Chris Gorsuch, Paul Templeton, Cytronic, Steve Moran, TR Need, Alan Lutson, CM Holmes, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. And of course, you can always hit that subscribe button. That is free. Cheers. See ya.